Hello everyone. Today I'm gonna talk about SwiftData versus core data and which one should you use. Mostly based on my personal journey of deploying two apps into App Store, one with SwiftData, the other one with core data. But I did try to migrate that one to SwiftData and failed, so that should provide you some context and help you to make your decision. So I'd like to put conclusion at the top. So should I use SwiftData or core data when you deploy your app? So if you're building a brand new toy project or if you are a beginner, yes, start with Swift Data and see what happens. If you have an existing app that uses core data, yeah, give Apple's migration to a shot. Maybe after doing the simple migration, following WWDC video, already work for you. If you have a very complicated app that relies on a lot of multi-threading and have complicated optional relationship and a lot of complicated querying, a lot of a complicated predicate, I would not advise you to use Swift Data. Most likely it's not going to be worth it. Before we dive into the video, I want to shout out to some of the resources that really helped me to learn Swift Data and helped me to form my opinion about the Swift Data. So the first link is from Karen. She converted a core data project to Swift Data project. She go through the pros and cons. And yeah, to be honest, if you want to dive into technical detail, you should watch this one instead of my video. So the second thing I want to give shout out to is hacking with Swift. Swift Data by example. So you want to build your foundation with Swift Data. Yeah, that's a fantastic resources. Also, Fat Bob Man's blog. His blog is very, very good, comparing the difference between Swift Data and core data and teaches you how to migrating some of your core data knowledge into Swift Data. Swift Data Pitfalls, a very good blog post telling you what kind of issues you might run into, a very common issue. Next is shipping side project in 222 easy steps. So this is not really related to Swift Data. However, this is the video that really helps me to ship my project, inspire me to actually work on it. Basically, the idea of 222 is that you should be able to come up with the project in 2 hours, have it sketched up, and in 2 days, you should be able to use static information to come up with a prototype that actually deployable on your phone to give it to people to see how they feel about your product. And in 2 weeks, you should be able to deploy this into App Store with dynamic data, but with a really MVP, minimum viable product. So you can test the market, see how your app's gonna perform. So this really helped me to ship the two apps I'm gonna talk about. So with that out of the way, let's go into my journey of converting or developing two of my apps into App Store with Swift Data. So example one, it's a failed migration from core data to Swift Data. So here below is my development timeline. So in May of 2023, that's when I started the developments. So that process took about 5 months. In the meantime, I keep enhancing the core data structure. Try to make it stabilized before I ship it to App Store. So once I get it to be in a good state, I saw the WWDC video, got excited about Swift Data. So I try to migrate that into Swift Data. It took me a month, and I finally just give up because I don't think it's ready for my project. And after a month with that, I started my test flight release. And after 2 months of that, I released my app into the App Store. So why does the migration failed for this specific project? Yeah, first, the data got very complicated. So as I mentioned in previous slides, I developed on the core data for about 5 months. So during the process, I started using predicate, negative predicate, compound predicate, dynamic predicate, resulting it touches a lot of part that Swift Data is just not equipped to handle. Second, virtually there's no presentation for Swift Data at the time. I have to wait for a forum post and response, so that's not ideal. And Swift Data is buggy at the time as well. So basically, I have to figure out am I doing something wrong, or Swift Data is just buggy. It's not behaving as expected. And SwiftData is, I feel, is less tolerant about you not understanding the threading model. So with SwiftData, you have to code more carefully. The framework itself does not give you too much leeway to make terrible mistake. And actually, most importantly, SwiftData is slow in my testing. And it's so slow, I measured about sometimes 100 times slower, 200 times slower compared to core data. So let's dive into each one of these points in detail. About the data, how complicated my app is. I'm going to use the abstract example. So let's say you create a car object. Then you have color, you have engine, you have wheels, you have screws. All those are belongs to your car, and etc. You can have more other components. For your screws, you have different type of screws: M1, M2, M3, M4, etc. So far, this is a very simple data structure. It can be easily represented in core data as well as SwiftData. So now let's add a parallel object to car called filter, where you can query the components of all cars by two categories: cosmetic and crucial. And we assign color as cosmetic, engine, wheel, and screws as crucial. Yeah, it gets a little bit complicated, but because it now requires a relationship between car components and the two filters. Yeah, for example, you can say, give me all cosmetic. It will get you all colors belongs to all cars in the database. Give me all crucial components or crucial engines. It will get you all the engines. When I was trying this back in 2023, this relationship is already a little bit shaky. Something as simple as this is probably okay, but things are a bit more complicated if you add an optional object, right? A car can optionally have sunroof, so sunroof is considered that as a cosmetic item. It's also optional. So having this optional here really throws off the SwiftData back in 2023. The syntax of optional chaining starting to fall apart, and the performance starting to get very slow. Next, limited documentation and buggy. With SwiftData, this situation is slightly worse. And not only does it have classic cryptic error message, it has a bit more error that no one has answered for. Some error that is caused by bug in versions of SwiftData as well. So in short, it is just very, very new, and you're a beginner or just want to ship a project like me. These are not good characteristic of a framework you want to be using in your project, because you want to be focusing on the project itself. You don't want to be debugging framework more than you are working on your project. Next, less tolerant and bad performance. So this is really what kills it for me. Now let's look at the code block from Fat Bob Man's blog post. I have these kind of code blasted all over my code base. Actually, what I use instead of dot context.perform, I use something probably even worse. I use perform context.perform and wait, which not only blocks the main thread, it's also very ugly syntax to carry around. Now, on the right hand side is a SwiftData version. The first part of the code is setting up the wrapper for SwiftData multi-threaded access. The second block is accessing it. There are a few issues with the SwiftData approach. First, I don't really like SwiftData infers the data context instead of giving me a global way to access the data. Sometimes I just want the data to be processed on the main thread. But in SwiftData, when you call and use the data handler, it kind of detects, per se, what context you're running. Is it background thread? Is it main thread? And it inherits that context. I do not like that behavior. Second, detach can get out of control really fast. I had an issue where I exhaust the thread pool using core data. It took me such a long time and carefully getting rid of some of the detached thread to resolve the issue. Third, it is very slow. A full disclaimer, the slowness can be caused by my skill issue, but we are looking at core data trying to do stuff on the main thread versus SwiftData trying to do the same thing in the background, a detached thread. In my testing, SwiftData is much, much slower. It's like The same query can take 5 milliseconds in core data in the main thread versus 500 milliseconds to 1 second to finish in SwiftData, making core data about 100 times or 200 times faster than SwiftData. That is absolutely insane, and it's the deal breaker for me to stop the migration altogether. Next, we have time constraint as India, right? Let's go back and take a look at the timeline. I released the first test flight version after abandoning SwiftData, and I released into App Store 2 months after that. This app is so far in the store. It's pretty fast and does not have many showstoppers. User does not encounter crashes too often. As indie, you always have limited amount of time to work on your favorite project, right? Do you really want to use that scarce resource for making SwiftData work? Personally, I would not make that trade-off. Now, let's move on to the project where I did use SwiftData and ship the project with SwiftData. As you can see, the project is very short in terms of development cycle. The entire project only took about 2 months to finish. It's a passion project for myself because I need an app like this, but I could not find it in the App Store. If you recall the 222 method, right, I'm supposed to ship this app in 2 weeks, but it's a little bit more complicated, and I want to have a bit more polish than that because I will be messing with users' data. And in my specific app, if there's something wrong with users' data, they will be very unhappy. So why do I use SwiftData still? It's very elegant syntax. It's just so pleasant to deal with, and something so Swifty and modern to use compared to using something ancient like core data. Writing SwiftData really makes me happy. Next, after learning from the issue I ran into the previous app, I designed a very simple data structure that is scalable, but still fit my app's need. Next, for this specific app, SwiftData works okay. Most of the issues I run into are not related to SwiftData framework itself. And there's no deal breaker during the development time as well. It just sort of works. Like not perfect, but sort of works. And iCloud is surprisingly easy to implement in SwiftData as well. So is this a SwiftData success story? Well, sort of. Let's take a look at the pros and cons. For the pros, it's faster to develop and more pleasant to develop, to be honest. I prefer it to core data. And it's way less code. It's much easier to reason about, especially for simple operations. And you don't have to mess with the entity editor anymore. I hate that thing, right? It's like you have to switch context between adding stuff using your keyboard and mouse and just writing code. I don't like that context switching. And for the cons, from what I see, SwiftData is not bad at hosting data, but querying, searching, and filtering data can still be very slow, especially dynamic filtering. I have a search bar in my app. Once data entry count passes like 200, it becomes visibly sluggish to search. Okay, of course, this might be a scary issue. Overall, it still works, but in core data, I did the same thing, and I don't feel the lag at all. So let's go back to the conclusion after knowing what I go through with the two apps. I still strongly recommend using SwiftData for beginners and the simple project. It is possible to migrate from SwiftData to core data if you need it in the future. But if you plan to do a really, really complicated app that you want to do fancy sorting, searching, predicate, relationship lookup, I really cannot in good conscience recommend you to use SwiftData. I have been burned by this, and my app, in my opinion, was very simple, and SwiftData still hasn't caught up to that yet. All right, thanks for watching. See you in the next video.